And let's get started. Let's introduce um, our speakers today. Scott, would you like to go first?
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Petri. I'm a history teacher at John F. Kennedy High School in beautiful Granada Hills, California, which is a suburb in the, I would say, northwestern part of Los Angeles. I always like to say Los Angeles, don't believe the press. It's really not that bad. Most of the time it's 70 degrees here while you're all suffering some sort of bomb cyclone.
Yeah, I like that. I am from Texas. I'm English Runyon. I'm a curriculum developer at Listenwise, but before that, I was an English teacher named English. I taught ninth and 10th grade ELA, a little bit of eighth grade, but I liked staying on the high school side. But in Texas, our weather is just so random. The idea that it could be like consistent is so foreign to me. Okay, moving on. Okay, for those of you who aren't familiar with ListenWise, I just want to give you a brief summary about what we are and who we are. ListenWise has thousands of nonfiction podcasts for grades 2 through 12. We're great for multilingual learners, ELs, as well as students in content areas like ELA and social studies. We have curriculum and English language development standards aligned lessons for ELA, social studies, STEM, and we have current events that address the 4 strands of literacy. So reading, writing, listening, and speaking. We have a lot of teacher resources, including auto-scored quizzes, teacher's guides, scaffolded supports, listening organizers, comprehension discussion questions. We'll dig a little bit deeper into those things today. And best of all, you can try ListenWise before you buy it. We have free premium trials that you can have long enough to really see if this is right for you and your students. All right. And then Scott, I'd love we've given you a heads up about just the general things about ListenWise, but I'd love Scott for you to just share your point of view. What hooked you to ListenWise? And then I'll do the same as well.
So as a history teacher, I love being able to give my students that multiple modalities. I want them to learn from video. I want them to learn from audio. I want them to learn from text. I want them to learn from art. I want them to be able to integrate all those different sources and be able to come up with what we call a line of reasoning. And I love starting a unit with ListenWise because as students actually hear what's going on in the news story, they hear the people in the protests screaming and they hear the breaking glass and they can automatically see themselves there, as opposed to if you play a old, blurry, grainy, black and white video for them, they don't quite empathize with those people. They don't see themselves there. There's something about audio that really brings the theater of the mind alive, and I think creates a lot more historical empathy in my students. So I do a lot of work with ListenWise, their stories. I do a lot of work with listening to speeches and things like that. The couple of interesting things I've learned along the ways using ListenWise is that it's like baby steps. It's a gateway drug. If you start off listening to the 2 to 4 to 6 minute audio clips of ListenWise, then it's a hop, skip, and a jump to like a longer 15 or 20-minute podcast. And that helps my high school students get ready for college, where most of you know our teachers, professors love to lecture for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. So how do you build that listening stamina in your students? ListenWise is a great way to start with it, where you can get your kids listening and doing different activities with that audio.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's something about listening that just you put yourself into it. I love that you've listed that theater of the mind. I'm not distracted by what's on the screen. I can imagine myself in this situation.
I totally stole that from Monica's book, by the way.
Oh,
And
okay.
I will say that in my years of being a ListenWise enthusiast, When I first started using it, as soon as I pushed the play button on the audio file, I would see every kid in my class reach for this. And they would start doing this while I was playing the file, and they didn't learn anything from it. So the most important thing you can do as a teacher, teaching them to listen, is help them understand that it's a skill that they can control and improve upon. But in order to get better at it, they have to remove those distractions. And if they just jump to their phones, or they're cued with the little zzz, zzz, or the ding ding on their phone, they're not very good listeners.
Exactly. I totally agree. Okay, I want to share a little bit of my point of view as a curriculum writer and former teacher. What I love about Listenwise, and I wish I'd had it in the class, I discovered it after leaving the class, is that Listenwise helps educators address grade level learning goals for all students. It doesn't water things down, it scaffolds up so that students can have the same educational experiences. It supports literacy across content areas as well. And so as an English teacher, I always kind of would like to remind teachers in other areas that you too teach reading. You too want to make the most out of reading, listening, writing, and speaking. So in a big way, I think there's engaging content that I can find quickly to use for curriculum, but also as a teacher, I'm not spending an hour after school finding the perfect video. It's so much easier to find. I like the flexibility of use. This is not a prescribed curriculum. I can use it in small groups. I can use it in whole groups. I can use it for research, a bell ringer, some extended learning opportunities for students who might be ahead. And there are tons of teacher resources and ELD scaffolds. So for the longest time, we've had scaffolds for students who may struggle with reading or whose first language isn't English. So in this little picture, you see a scaffold of our interactive transcript and our dictionary help, which is so fun. Students can hear it in Spanish or English. Students can get a little picture, which is I always look forward to seeing what picture will pop up. All right, let's get to the meat of our presentation today. Why teach the language of argumentation? Why teach the language of argumentation? Scott, I'll let you go first. You have this awesome comic.
So I'm just responding to Lucille in the chat. But yes, a few years ago when we had the Common Core standards hoisted upon our nation, there were all these new guidelines, and we were supposed to teach at the high school level 80%, 40% argumentative, 40% informative, and only 20% of the narrative instructional time be devoted to those writing types. And there's a lot of research that's happened since the Common Core. And what we now know is that argumentative writing is the hardest to teach, so we should probably teach it last. And it's easier for ELs to learn narrative writing because no matter what language you were brought up in, you all know the beginning, middle, and end of a story. Narrative is the easiest to teach, and it's also the most engaging. Everybody likes to tell a story. They like to put themselves in a story. And informative, I, as a history teacher, sure, you need to write a paper on World War II, but that's the boring type of writing that most people just cut and paste from Wikipedia anyways. So I think the narrative and the argumentative are probably where I spend most of my class time in my history classes. And I love cartoons, so I use these visual cues when I tell students we're going to do an argumentative essay, or an audio story where you're like, this I believe, this is my opinion. And I like playing that philosopher's chairs game where you set people up in different sides of the room based on how strongly they agree or disagree with the proposition or resolution. So I've done a lot of argumentation. I should disclose I was a debate student when I was in high school, and I coached debate my first 10 years of teaching. So I love getting kids in groups and having them argue.
Yeah. I always liked in English classes, like, this is so important. Who doesn't want to fight and win? Let's learn how to do that and see how people are doing that in our example model text or model audio. Okay, so here are some other reasons for teaching the language of argumentation. So number one is argue or argumentation is one of WIDA's 4 key language uses. If you're not familiar with WIDA, um, WIDA is an organization that has ELD standards frameworks that have been adopted by 41 states, territories, and federal agencies. So WIDA has a test called Access that also assesses students' English language proficiency according to these standards. The framework provides an instructional guidance for English language development, and it's grounded in the belief that multilingual learners are best served when they learn content and language at the same time. So certain content is going to fit well with argumentation. You know, am I able to learn the reason why for these beliefs? Am I able to explain my reasoning? The second reason I want to share that we should be teaching the language of argumentation is it aligns with core curriculum standards. Scott mentioned the Common Core. Here's some examples of Common Core standards that are for college and career readiness. We see them in listening and speaking, and then also writing. So evaluate a speaker's point of view, reasoning and use of evidence and rhetoric. Okay. Prepare for and participate effectively in a range of conversations. So sometimes our conversations are going to be sharing why we love something and why you should love it too. Building on others' ideas and expressing your own clearly and persuasively. Writing arguments to support claims and analysis of a substantive topic or text, using valid reasoning. So we don't always have to think about argumentation as like a pro-con argument. It's just pretty common way that we understand things and that we speak. All right, and then the last, I'm representing my home state of Texas here. Another reason for the language of argumentation is it aligns with assessments. So this is an example of a question from the Texas STAR test, so the state of Texas academic assessment of readiness. This year, everyone in Texas is excited, but maybe a little nervous that there's updates have been made to our state test that challenge students, but really they more closely align to what our standards are. So this is an interesting question because it's a new format, but it is asking students to think about and consider the kind of evidence and reasoning used to support a claim in this quotation. You know, it's excellent. It's what I want my students to be thinking about, why they're writing or calling their friend out about while they're having a conversation. You're just trying to make me sad. Like, that's not even important. You're just trying to play with my emotions. Well, this is awesome. Which of the following statements represent ideas emphasized in the emotional appeal in this quotation? All right, we can move forward. Okay. Using Listenwise to teach argumentation. Today I'm going to share some resources that Listenwise has to offer, and then Scott is going to run you through a really awesome sample lesson, and then I'll do the same thing, but having more of an eye towards ELD, English Language Learner students. So some of the argumentation resources that we have are listed in this chart. We have Friday debates that are currently published every other Friday, and they just feature a topic that is a part of public discourse right now. You can also always do a search and just put in debate in a colon or just debate, click enter, and then see our entire collection of debate stories. So everything we've ever published that is a debate. We also have standards aligned lessons. So these have more curriculum resources than our current events do. A Friday debate is a current event. There are not only comprehension and discussion questions, but there's external resources that relate. There are graphic organizers, so many things. And at the very bottom of these lessons, if you're viewing the teacher's guide, we list out content area standards and English language development standards that relate to that lesson. So this lesson, it's a little hard to see. It says first grader argues for pockets on girls' jeans. Definitely something to listen to, even if you teach students who are way older than first grade. But it's aligned to standards. Evaluate a speaker's point of view, reasoning, and use of evidence. Identify a reason an author or speaker gives to support a main point, and agree or disagree with the author of a speaker. Next, there's comprehension discussion questions. This is today's current event. It's kid news, which means it's the friendliest for 2nd through 6th grade. It's pretty interesting anyway. Maybe some math teachers would want to share it. On March 14th is Pi Day. The discussion question for this current event was, why might March 14th be a good idea to celebrate Pi Day? Explain using details from the audio story and your own ideas. So students have to go back to their listening, go back to the text, and have some reasoning. And they can also share their own perspective. Nearly all, not all of them, but a lot of our current event, or a lot of our discussion questions come with that reminder. Tell me why. Explain your reasoning. You can always customize your written assignments or these questions. Maybe you only want to have this question. Maybe you only want to have comprehension questions and not the discussion. This discussion is going to be for class. I'm assigning this just for homework to see if you've read it. You get the easier questions. And then last but not least, listening organizers or graphic organizers. We provide lots of different kinds of organizers, and we embed them in some of our lessons, and we embed them in other resources like our blogs. Many of them are customizable. You'll see one that Scott's going to use today. And we just want to save teachers time and help students be able to better understand what they're learning and have better note-taking skills. All right, Scott, please. Wow.
So I wanted to, Alfredo had a good question. I can tell he's one of those advanced placement teachers where he said, how do you take the winning out of the argument so people simply argue for the purpose of understanding someone else? And as a US history teacher, we call that deliberation. And we talk about the importance of compromise and reaching consensus. And this is what our Congress strives to do. Not always successfully, but they're working on it. They're trying. So I will say you're right, Alfredo. Winning is not always the point of an argumentative lesson. A lot of times you want to hear multiple perspectives. You want to hear multiple opinions on a topic and hope that you can achieve some sort of consensus. But for this lesson that I just did with my 11th grade US history students, we're finishing the Dust Bowl, finishing the Great Depression, moving towards World War II. And Listenwise has this great story called California Apologizes for the Deportation of Mexican Americans in the 1930s. And it's a wonderful story that most of our students have never heard of. There are, I believe, 4 lines on this story in our US history textbook. That's it, 4 sentences. And the students are always quite shocked when they... Yeah, we're in California, and I should say 80% of my students are Latino. So it's always kind of shocking how you want history to be a place where your students recognize themselves in history. And this is one of those, a bigger unit that I do when I teach World War II. I use this book by Dave Gutierrez called Patriots from the Barrio, and it's actually a Texas story, English. It's about these 2 high schools in Texas, El Paso, Texas, where their graduating classes joined the Army National Guard, and then were federalized and sent to Italy to fight Hitler's toughest troops, the Battle of the Rapido River. And 256 of these high school graduates from Texas go overseas to fight against Hitler. Only, I think, 37 come home. there's a huge court-martial. They try and court-martial the general in charge of that unit for military negligence after the war because the casualty rate was so high that the Mexican Americans were saying that you were just using our boys for cannon fodder, and this was an unwinnable battle. So there's quite a bit of drama, quite a bit of research went into this book by Dave Gutierrez, and I've linked in a link to his website. We've also done some other work with a cyber sandwich that I've linked in, which is an EduProtocol that you'll hear me talk about later. But for this lesson to just get started, I wanted the kids to simply listen to the story. They answered the Listenwise questions. I believe there were 10 questions in the story. They could turn and talk to a friend. They could hunt for the answers in the transcript. And after we listened to it as a whole class, they filled out their questions and then they filled out the debate organizer. And for that, I turned this into a homework assignment where I wanted them to take what I call an arguable position. You're either for paying reparations to people who were deported or you're against. And what I wanted to say is a lot of my students, they really hate taking a question or taking a position on something or stating an original thought without talking to their friends about it first. Because what if it's racist? What if it's not the popular opinion? What if they're wrong? A lot of times they want to clear this in a simple turn and talk with their friends before they're comfortable saying it in front of the whole class. And so this is spring semester, 11th grade. These kids have been doing argumentative writing for a little bit. I want them to string together 3 or 4 facts into what I call a line of reasoning. And what I asked them to do is just record a simple video of themselves stating their position, stating their line of reasoning, using 3 pieces of evidence from the debate organizer. So, and then I think we can go to the next slide. Where am I? Am I getting lost? Yeah. So I cut up pieces of the debate organizer so you could see it. This was the evidence that the person gathered for saying, yes, I believe we should pay reparations. And I want to say about 73% of the students were for reparations and 23% of the students were against reparations. So it's always kind of an interesting, one of the other games I like to play is Philosopher's Chairs, where they go to different stations and they see if they can talk you in or out of your position, and then you can move around the room to express where are you on the spectrum of believing this statement. But the first student, whose clip we are not going to play, said, yes, I'm for it, and I'm for it for these following reasons. And then can you go to the next clip or the next slide? And I believe you can click and hear this person's argument.
But before we do that really quickly, can we go back just for a second? I'm going to add something to your, to what you were saying. I wanted to point out, I have a couple of red little circles, that Scott's students are in 11th grade, they're experienced, they can listen to something and talk to friends and have tons of ideas on the pro-con side of an argument. But if students weren't as advanced, this organizer can help them feel safe about having reasoning. They can listen to a story and find a quote and come up with an idea. So I just, on the pro side for this student's graphic organizer, the first thing he said is the descendants can have a sense of justice. And I could see maybe an EL student saying a pro is justice. And they might have gotten that idea because of this quote, you know, that was directly from the transcript. To create a commission to complete our investigation about what should be done to correct the injustice. Okay, so they need justice. Something else would be, a pro would be, they need reparations because they were citizens. And there was that direct from the audio story in the transcript. 60% or more of those 2 million were actually United States citizens. So they might have their own ideas, or they might need the help of looking back, which as a teacher, I always wanted my students to do. Okay, your students did such a great job. I can't wait to hear the next one.
Another point of clarification, English, is that this story is from 2006. So in
evolved.
2006, they were discussing reparations, and one of the follow-ups I asked my students is, so how's this going? Have you gotten a check in the mail from the state of California yet? I mean, it's been 16, 17 years. We should be getting paid any day now, right?
Mhm.
And no, there's nothing on the California legislative agenda that is going to make this happen, I don't think.
It's interesting to see how not this is not a current event, but they're still so evergreen. You always can be talking about this topic.
Yes. So, and when we talk about Japanese internment, there were reparations made there, and there's a great deal of discourse out there on prospects of reparations for anybody that has been harmed by the government. So it's definitely something that students get engaged with and enjoy talking about and enjoy formulating a line of reasoning about. So for this next student, and I do want to give a little history of this student because I've had her for 2 years now, and I know I don't know if she says her name for privacy purposes, but she has been a struggling student, and I was so impressed. This definitely sample leaped to the head of the class because she used solid reasoning with her evidence, and it was kind of surprising. Like, this was the unpopular answer. And I would have thought that some of my students might not want to wade into this. And if they were going to, they would go with the safe answer. So I don't know if you're ready to play the clip now. Again, you can see there's typos and spelling mistakes in here. I don't care about that stuff. I'm not an English teacher.
I love the authenticity. Even 11th graders make mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. I want them to feel comfortable recording themselves and making a line of reasoning. And so that's what I tried to do in this next audio clip.
Hey, Scott, can you play that from your computer just so that, privacy reasons, we don't want to see?
Well, let me see.
You know what? I can. Necessary.
Okay, because I'm using a different computer and the flip is not logged in yet.
Got it. I can do that. Hold on just a second.
I should give away reparations to people of Mexican descent who have had a relative who was illegally deported in the 1930s. If you ask me, I would have to say I disagree with the idea. My first reason is that the U.S. wouldn't be able to just casually give away money to at least 2 million descents. According to the website usdebtclock.org, the U.S. is currently over $31 trillion in debt, and to be able to just give away money to millions of people when there are other issues going on in our country currently is ridiculous. Not to mention that the people who would be taking the money would not actually be the people who suffered. What was done was done. There's no fixing what has already happened. The only thing the U.S. could do is learn from their mistakes and move forward with taking all that into account. Not to mention that I strongly believe that this would cause a lot of commotion in the far right. It would make them feel as if they're being threatened in a way of life and might cause violence, considering that they have a history of mentioning their tax money being used on things that they don't necessarily agree with. It was just another thing for them to complain about and disagree. A huge question that has been crossing my mind a lot while looking at this assignment is, how would we track all these descendants? We don't really know if somebody is telling the truth or not, if they're just in it for the money. So there would just be no good way of actually tracking all these people. And like I said before, money doesn't fix everything. What was done was done.
She did such a good job.
I loved her line of reasoning. She uses academic language from the podcast, which I love, but then she also integrates her prior knowledge. In 2006, when they were first doing this story, there wasn't really the rise of the far right like we have seen in recent years. And there wasn't as much, I would say, polarization about these issues of the border. So I love the fact that she brings in her personal experiences, her personal viewpoint, and also the practicality of how does the government go back 70 plus years to figure out if you or your family members were actually harmed and then worthy of reparations. So I thought this student did a really good job explaining her reasoning, and that was really just the beginning, because if you go to the next slide, you see how we keep extending this lesson. that this just was kind of the tip of the iceberg in getting my students interested in learning about Mexico-US border conflicts. And what was very interesting is that the Listenwise story says 2 million Mexicans were deported, 1 million of whom were citizens. The US history textbook says 400,000 were deported. And the book we're reading, Patriots from the Barrio, which has footnotes and reveals its sources, says that 1 million Mexican Americans were deported. So the question I pose to them is, which of these students is more, which of these sources is more reliable?
Did you have them go back and, consider when were things published and do a little research on their own? I know that it seems like this student had done some research. She knew the amount of debt, all of that. Do you kind of let them have time to do that?
So, well, the flip part of the video was a homework piece. So I wanted them to mainly use the debate organizer for their line of reasoning, but that student, she clearly had opinions of her own and other information that she added to it. And that's what I think good learning is. I love that.
Did you hear conversation, though, as they were doing the in-class portion that brought up any of these ideas, or you kind of probe them with new ideas?
I did. I like to walk around. I call it TWA, teaching while walking around. And sometimes kids will have questions, or you say, hey, what side are you thinking about taking? Or, hey, what evidence are you thinking about? What's the strongest piece of evidence you have? And, I find when I'm walking around the room and engaging with them, they're more likely to be working and not on their phones. So I do a lot of what I call TWA. So, and then, the one last thing I wanted to say is, like, when you start talking about these current events and these issues, there was just a news story on KQED, which is our public radio, public TV station here in California. And they reported on the 75th anniversary of one of the worst plane crashes in California history, where 28 of these Mexican braceros who were being deported were killed. And the big commotion was that the Mexican braceros were buried in a mass grave in Bakersfield, I believe, but the white pilots and the white individuals from the, it wasn't the INS at the time, I forget the name of the agency, but they were sent home to their villages and to their hometowns for burial, and the braceros were just buried in a mass grave. So there's talk about, well, was this justice? And KQED did a great follow-up story on this, where they uncovered a guy who tracked down all 28 of these individuals and notified their families, and talked about days of remembrance for these victims and stuff like that. So it was nice for the kids to see, yeah, this happened in 1930, and we just don't stop and move on. We're still trying to right the wrongs from this injustice. And here was a nice little, it was another audio story. I think it's like about an 8 or 10 minute podcast. I linked it on the previous slide, where it says worst plane crashes. And you can see that there were pictures of this mass burial, and there's pictures of them examining the wreckage of the plane as well. So, all right, I'll stop talking English. You can take it away.
But it's just so interesting. Okay, I am going to outline, if I'm thinking about maybe a younger student or a multilingual learner student, how could I do something similar to what Scott did? So I will share the content objective that I have for this lesson that I would be doing is students will be able to identify important questions and themes in Lois Lowry's novel, The Giver. The language objective I would have used is students will be able to argue and support their opinion of a world without feelings or memories. So they're learning about a book they're going to read in an ELA, ELD class. So during the lesson cycle, kind of like Scott, this would be a beginning activity, a hook to build anticipation for reading a text. We know that a big topic and a theme is about the importance of memory. Or is about the importance of memory, or is memory necessary? And so they're going to get their mind wrapped around that idea. The resources that I would be using is the Giver and Memory ELD version from the Listenwise library. Our ELD lessons are new and exciting, and they've only been around since about August, and they're growing quickly. I would use the fill in the blank or a close organizer and a details and big ideas T-chart that are embedded, and a think, pair, share ELD protocol that are embedded within the lessons, assignment resources, and ELD teacher's guide. So I'll move on. A lot of text. I wish there was more pictures here, but I'm going to take you into the platform to show you some things in a second. So my process, step 1, students and teachers would review and discuss the lesson's video, objectives, and vocabulary. And in a second, I will show you on the main page, with ELD lessons, we have a little video to help with background knowledge and add some more methods of understanding, that many modalities. We have an objective, we have objectives written too, and I only tweaked it a little bit for the one I'd be using for class. And then we'd preview vocabulary. And this is a suggestion that comes from the ELD Teacher's Guide, which breaks the lesson apart into before, during, and after reading. So step 2 would be students listen to the podcast as a whole class with access to the transcript. I'll be showing you the transcript, and the exciting thing about our ELD transcripts is students can see them in Spanish and hopefully soon other languages. And then the teacher would stop playing at planned times to be able to note vocabulary that we just learned about. Maybe a teacher could even print off the transcript and they could highlight, oh, I saw that vocabulary word. And then also highlight language or ideas that they agree or disagree with. That's an important part of our objective, right? Our language objective. Well, what do I think is okay? What do I not agree with? Can I explain why? So a teacher would be a big part of modeling the first stop or two. Step 3, students listen to the podcast in small groups before and while completing a fill in the blank or a close exercise to pair content talked about in this story with their language skills. And then step 4, students would use the think, pair, share ELD protocol to do some of the discussion questions. I've noted that I would only be using questions 1 through 3 in the discussion question because I feel like for my purposes for this lesson, the comprehension question 4 is not necessary. So I'm going to take it out. And then step 5, students and teachers would work together to create a class details and big ideas T-chart, kind of similar to the T-chart that Scott's mentioned, our debate organizer, but I think this one was already woven into the assignment through the teacher's guide, and it gets to the same outcome for ELD or younger students. All right. So I'm going to take over a little bit and show you some of these steps on our platform. All right. Okay. Is everyone able, are we seeing the giver and memory up here? Nice.
Yes.
So this is our ELD lesson. Back at step 1, we're going to introduce the lesson talking video.
Back at step 1, we're going to introduce the lesson talking video.
It's a little, I'm getting some playback, sorry. Talking about the video and objectives and vocabulary. So here, every lesson has a short video. And then I go to the assignment resources. There are objectives. You're going to see they're very similar to the ones that I'm going to be presenting to my students. I'd probably just present those. Students will be able to argue and support their opinion of a world without feelings or memories. And then we have vocabulary. As whenever we can find a Spanish cognate, we add that to our vocabulary list. And super awesome. For right now, we only have Spanish as an option, but soon, hopefully more. We can, loading, change a lot of this to be in Spanish to support students. So you see it here. Awesome. Okay, I'm just going to play a super short part of this video just to see how it's getting their mind thinking through a different modality about memories and emotions.
This rabbit is running for its life.
Notice the Spanish subtitles.
It's a response to one of the most common emotions in the animal kingdom, fear.
Emotions are really important in order to guide behavior.
For years, researchers have struggled to understand how emotions are formed and processed by the brain. Kevin Labar is a neuroscientist at Duke University and is funded by the National Science Foundation.
In the brain, what you're doing in an emotional situation is you're taking the input from the environment, and then it transforms that input into a body response.
For the rabbit, fear begins when sensory information, like the scent of a predator, is transported through the central nervous system to the brain by a network of cells called neurons. The signals are integrated in a part of the brain called the limbic system, which is present in most animals, even humans.
So I'll stop there. But basically, if we didn't have memory, we wouldn't know what to do to save ourselves in dangerous situations. There would be a lot of things that we would miss out on. I changed English, although I wish I was bilingual. In the ELG Teacher's Guide, see, I'm mentioning that before, listening, during, and after. There's some questions that you can ask students about the video. And so they're here. Ask, what does the actor in the video believe everyone can relate to? There's just some different things. All right, going to our next step. We would listen to this audio as an entire story. So I've got the story here, or as an entire class, I've got the story here. I would probably have this printed off for students just so they can, be doing something with their hand if we're in class listening. And I would remind students that I'm going to stop occasionally and ask them to highlight when have they seen one of those vocabulary words? And then also, is there something that they agree or disagree with? So if I were to stop the first time, I would hope that students would notice that a vocabulary word has been used, the word premise. I'd also, when we would highlight that, I'd also maybe ask, and this would probably be something they'd really need to model, if there's anything that they agree or disagree with. So I could imagine that students might not like this idea. If a world had no memories, maybe we'd have to take drugs to suppress our emotions and our memories. So our step three would be taking time to do the close exercise with people in our class, or people with other students in the class. And so I see that that is listed here in there. During listening time, it reminds me that I should be doing the closed sentences to get a better understanding. So if I go back to assignment resources, I can see those right here. Fill in the blank organizer, got those closed sentences. Easy to find. And then lastly, I would have students working in a think, pair, share type protocol to answer the comprehension questions. I didn't want comprehension 4. I would take that out. I'd have them focusing on these. And then we'd all work together, focusing on the top 3 in the discussion theme. And then lastly, we'd work together as a class to do an organizer, like a class example of an organizer. Ava, you can take back over. And go to the next slide. And here's an example of the T-chart, important details and big ideas. And I would help students, we'd work together as a class to process what they said in their groups about what do you think the world would be like without memories and why. And then I'd help them come up with some details from the story. We'd be looking for things that might prove something like it would be scary with no memories. So here's an example from the text. Every person in this dystopian community must wear uniforms and take drugs to suppress their emotions. Maybe that was something that they didn't agree with, so that would be scary if the government made me take a certain drug. And then the other kind of big ideas, they might have noticed this detail first, that if there was a way to manipulate human memory, people wouldn't have to remember anything bad. Well, that actually sounds good. So maybe the world would be happier without memories. And then we would take what we came up with, and it might be a lot of modeling at first, but we would practice then as a group, sharing our opinion and supporting it with some of these details. So it might look like, I think the world would be scary without memories because people might have to take drugs to forget things. Or I think the world would be happier without memories because no one would remember the bad stuff that happened. So we're allowing them to share their opinion and also have reasoning to support it with some more scaffolding to get them there. Okay, and with that, we've talked about a lot today. Thank you so much for being with us.